Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Conversations, the show where we have the conversations that I don't think enough people are having. And today we're here to have a really exciting conversation, which I'm really personally passionate about because I have my own experience of not my own experience of what we're calling it now, but I had an experience that I could understand how this happens in the world. And Rosie and I are here to have a really awesome conversation today about the overemployment controversy. So, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, or if you have never joined us, please get in the conversation. This isn't just a conversation for the two of us. It is a conversation for all of us who are passionate about this topic, who are passionate about creating more space, a more understanding for our employees, and maybe just having a conversation instead of being so hard-lined what our ideas might be, especially when they're coming from, I like to call it corporate trauma scenarios, the things we've just always done because corporate said so. So please get in your conversation, share that you're here, let us know, say hello, share perspectives, thoughts, questions. We would love to have you in the conversation. And welcome, we've got some peeps joining us already. Hi Arshad, hi Steven. Super happy to have you. And please share your thoughts and comments as we go throughout this conversation today. Rosie, when we met, I was like, woo, a little fireball we have in Rosie today. And I'm super happy to have you here to have this conversation because there's a lot of broken narratives in the world, let's be honest. Mm-hmm. So before I give anything away, I'll let you introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, where in the world you are, what you're so passionate about, and why you wanted to have this conversation about overemployment today.
Oh, is that all? Sure.
No pressure.
No pressure. Hi, everybody. It's so great to be here with all of you. And of course, great to be here with you, Tracy. Really, I feel the same about you. Your energy is infectious. So I'm already getting jazzed up. And yes, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rosie Yeung. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am coming to you today from what we now call Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations indigenous to Turtle Island, including the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. So I share that not just as a rote land acknowledgement, but because part of the work I do is very much, I call myself a Jedi warrior, and I don't use those terms lightly. Jedi, yes, because I am a Star Wars fangirl, and so I love the idea of a Jedi, but it also has a meaning as an acronym, which is for justice, equity, decolonization, and inclusion. And so work that I do, which is various things. I'm a mindset liberation coach. I am, as I said, Jedi warrior, so doing education and awareness building around Jedi issues. And having conversations like the one we're going to have today, Tracy, is part of truth and reconciliation, and bringing that enlightenment as well as sparking conversations that go deeper than the surface, because things like racism, discrimination, the way we work, capitalism, there's a lot of things that are not obvious. So it's easier for people to say, but we're not racist, or that's not racist, because they don't actually see the systemic issues and the mindsets behind it. So that's what I'm eager to get into today when we unpack some new media stuff that's come up around this thing they're calling overemployment.
So Rosie is the one who presented this topic to me because there's a few articles that are out recently about this overemployment controversy. So for those of our guests who aren't familiar with some of the narrative that's going on in this conversation right now, can you give us a little bit of an overview of what people are saying? And then we'll hop right into the conversation about what's up with that.
For sure. And I think I might have linked somewhere in one of my posts, but I'll also add that to the comments at the end. So you don't have to go and look at it now. We'll just talk about what those articles say. Essentially, if you've heard of quiet quitting, this to me sounds like the new quiet quitting as in that it's the latest thing that employers and companies are complaining that employees are doing. And it's complex, right? It's not there's one right side or one wrong side. So that's what we'll talk about. But in essence, there have been a couple of media articles with some very prominent or viral posts that have gone about. One of them, which is the main focus of what I want to talk about, is from a company. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to give them that publicity, but a tech company in the US whose CEO publicly outed these employees that he proudly announced he fired because he said these employees were working two jobs, not just the one that they hired them for, and that it was stealing from the company because these individuals were not doing their job. And there are some very valid points in there, if they're true, about the fact that they were not fulfilling the obligations of the job, like attending meetings, producing work product, committing to the deliverables that they had promised that, that's part of their employment contract, right? Employment agreement. And then the employer, the CEO specifically said they're immoral, stealing, and, they fired them. And a second case, which to me is also troubling in a different way. The idea is the same, people working two jobs, trying to do it simultaneously, which, as you can imagine, doesn't work. But not only that, the company, which I will call out because it's Equifax, and Equifax is a credit check company that has access to some pretty invasive tools or software to find information out about people. And essentially, the article said that Equifax used these invasive tools on their own employees. I don't know the details about how much permission was given, but it sounded like, at least from the employees, they didn't think that was okay. And by using this tool, they were found several, like I think 24 employees that Equifax said were working two jobs and was planning to fire them.
Okay, so I want to share my experience because I have a uniquely relevant experience and it has greatly impacted my opinion of that you guys might hear in this conversation today. In my very first job, and I think this is probably, I wouldn't say it's totally unique in the corporate work environment, especially working in really big companies. I had probably about 2 hours of work a day. And so I'm a good employee. I sat there for 8 hours a day and mostly played Minesweeper and got really, really good at it. Right? And so it was always confusing to me that if my value, the things you want me to do, have this amount of dollar value for you, and I can do those in 2 hours a day, then why should I sit here for 6 hours a day and play Minesweeper, right? One, I'm using your technology and your internet connection to play Minesweeper, which is just a huge waste of human potential, let's be honest. As much as I love you, Minesweeper, it never made sense to me. And I mean, like, sometimes it was great. I used the extra time to plan my wedding, like a whole bunch of things, right? I used the time. I created this passport to fitness program where people could like get workouts at lunch and stuff. So I had time and space to do some things that were fun for me. But my job did not take me 8 hours a day. And so my perspective on this is that, well, my own perspective, if I could go and work at this place for 2 hours a day and provide this much value, couldn't I go and work somewhere else for another 2 hours of the day and provide that same amount of value and add those two salaries together? And I'm still only working 4 hours. I'm working half the amount of time, but making double the amount of money, right? I think these are, for a long time, those mindsets are things that the corporate work environment has ignored. And if you have smart people who want to be challenged, who are sitting, wasting their time at a job that's going to hold you there, handcuff you there for 8 hours, they're going to go away. And I remember when I had some conversations about this to some of the other employees at the time, and they had this internal, like, theoretically it was nice, right? They would announce everybody's anniversary. So you've been here for 1 year, you've been here for 2 years. And I got my, I've been here for 4 years, right? And I had one of my friends be like, better not see you having a 5th anniversary here. And I was like, if other people can see my struggle so hard, then that's annoying. And this is exactly how I felt, Arshad. I'm punished for being smart and gifted and effective, right? Shouldn't I be like an ideal candidate because I'm those things? So that's my perspective, Rosie, and I'd love to hear your perspective, maybe on my situation first, and then we can start to extrapolate that into some of the more controversial ones.
Oh gosh, so we have 5 hours for our conversation, right, Tracy? Because it's gonna, and I would love to please keep putting your comments or your comments in the chat, or your chat in the comments, because I definitely want to hear your opinions. Okay, so the way I see overemployment, it's a slightly different take than your situation. And there's issues in what you've described as well. Issues in that the false idea of FaceTime. So yes, for sure, the way companies still handicap people and create, I would say, mythical or false expectations of, well, I'm the boss, and if I'm here, you better be here too, regardless of whatever you have to do. I could see, and this gets to mindset, because I think what is key for me that's problematic isn't even so much what the company is saying or the employee is saying or doing, it's the thinking behind it. So please, I should maybe share with folks too that my background before I became a coach and a Jedi warrior, I spent 20 years in corporate. So I am a CPA, CA, chartered accountant basically, and a designated HR professional. So I spent 20 years basically doing what these employers are doing, right? Protecting the company, trying to basically extract the maximum possible from employees. So no companies out there need to tell me to put myself in their shoes. I've been in your shoes. I was those shoes for the longest time. And I actually don't, now that I'm out, I don't agree with a lot of the things, which is my perspective. So I guess my opinion or thoughts on what you were sharing, Tracy, is that there's clear underutilization in a bad way. And I say bad way because companies typically want utilization that is maximizing production and whatnot. And what I think they're saying, what they would probably say in your situation is, well, why don't you show some initiative, Tracy? Why don't you go ask for more work? Why don't you blah, 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 blah? But how are they, giving you the right opportunities? Like you could ask for more work and maybe it'd be crap, or maybe it'd be stuff a woman could do, right? Like plan the social party or whatever it is. Are they giving you work that's interesting to you? And why should it just be totally on you if they are misallocating or misplanning their schedule? So it really depends. It's situation dependent. What I have the biggest issue with is when people think that being physically in an office or in a Zoom room or whatever it is these days means you're working, and that's what's required, not actual outcomes.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure, especially all of us who've been corporate, have been in one of those meetings where you're like, this could have been an email. I saw a LinkedIn post not long ago where a gentleman had quit his high level position because he had one too many meetings that could have been an email. And I think this is an important thing to not ignore in this conversation, because with all of the pieces of hybrid work now, and all of the different challenges we've experienced over the past 2.5 years, figuring out how do we manage productivity, right? What even is productivity? Like, what am I expecting each of these people to produce? My background is marketing, so seeing a lot of things that are like production for production's sake, and then feeling like, yeah, well, my schedule is full and I work 10 hours a day because I'm creating content for no good reason, right? Sure, I can do that. But again, at the end of the day, no one gets jazzed about that as the employee, right? No one, and that's kind of where this plays into quiet quitting as well, right? You're just like, well, I'll just do what I must.
Right.
And then I'll find another opportunity.
Well, I think part of what your experience was in that moment, and also what you're highlighting now, is one of the inequities underlying pay inequity, or maybe one of the mindsets and fallacies underlying pay inequity. And when I say pay inequities, it's gender is the most prominent, where men on average are getting paid higher than women on average, but it's in between as well. It's how much the CEO or in the very top of the organization gets paid versus the very bottom of the organization, and that's usually a very big gap in between top and bottom. And what I notice, if you think about it, we as a human race really have tended to value or assess wages and compensation initially on inputs. By inputs, I generally mean time and hours, right? So even the idea of pay per hour, minimum wage, is all on a per hour basis, which means regardless of value, like regardless of how precious that outcome is and whatever you do within an hour, the price is still the same. It breaks down when you start thinking about these high level, quote unquote, high level positions like executive roles, VPs, even, directors and certainly CEOs, where they have the same number of inputs available. Like all of us humans have only the same amount of hours to put into anything, including our work. So how is it that, say, CEOs making millions of dollars, they're clearly not getting paid on inputs because they can't possibly put in the amount of hours, even if they worked literally 24/7. How could that equate to millions of dollars, whereas somebody working even 40 hours a week only gets whatever, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year, right? So clearly, CEOs, and once you pass a certain tier, are getting paid and valued based on outcomes, outputs, these intangible things that cannot just be measured by how many hours you're working or how much time you're sitting in your chair at the office. Mm-hmm. So how is that fair, I guess? Or like, why is it that that's the benefit attributed to these certain positions and not others? Whereas if you were to look at, let's say, opportunity cost, or how much you would actually value, and I'm not picking on janitorial stuff, but I think that tends to be something that comes up. As a business owner, I am now facing things like, okay, what am I going to do versus is there something I could pay someone else to do that would free up my time to do something else, right? Mm-hmm. And that's usually the mentality of, well, the CEO is so precious, their time is so precious, their brain must be so precious that we should pay someone else to do their admin work or whatever so that they can focus on what they're really good at. So then you have executive assistants who are supporting the CEO get paid a lot more than admin assistants that are supporting managers, not necessarily because the work is that much harder or that they're that much smarter, but it's kind of the opportunity cost of, well, if the CEO had to do his own phone calls, then that's costing the company that much more. But that problem is kind of fake. It's based on how much compensation the CEO is getting already, right, to a certain degree. Like I'm talking about these extremes of pay gap. So if you think about as the CEO of my own company, how much would I pay someone so that I don't have to worry about cleaning up my kitchen every day, because that's taking time away from whatever else is that I need to do, or to clean the toilets or anything, right? It's probably a lot higher than the minimum wage or whatever that they're getting now, which is, again, just based on their time or how much not education they have, all sorts of stuff. There's a real inequity in the way we consider how people should be compensated, and then therefore what companies are entitled to based on how much they pay.
Oh, and now I feel like 10 hours for this conversation.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Because then we start to talk about the like kind of basic inequity in society, right? And any one given person's opportunity to become a CEO versus become janitorial staff, because like the barrier to entry for janitorial staff, very low, right? Pretty much anybody could do it. Same thing with taxi driving, right? Like, well, let's go drive a taxi because I can drive a taxi, right? Although you have to be able to drive, at least in that scenario. But I don't know. I've been in some taxis where that was questionable. New York City, predominantly, but yes. There's not an equal opportunity for every single human to become a CEO, right? Yes. Like that's just not the thing. Even if the value of their brain, how they see diverse thought, problem solving, those types of things that are highly valued in a CEO, from underrepresented groups. Underrepresented from the CEO board level representation. Yeah, it just doesn't happen. Yes. Right? What else? Yes. How would you add to that?
Ooh, Arshad. Yeah, please message me.
Yes, message Rosie. Get connected.
Yes, let's do it.
The more Jedi warriors we have, the better.
Yes, the more of us, the stronger the force, right? Like we build into this Star Wars force. So yes,
I really wish I had my lightsaber right now.
Oh, I didn't know you had a lightsaber. Now I'm behind. I need to. Okay, Tracy, you're clearly my master. I'm needing to learn from you. Okay.
We all learn from each other as Jedis.
Ah, that's true Jedi thinking. I love it. Okay, you're bringing up so much good stuff here. I think okay, so here's where I think things start to uh, diverge a little bit from what your initial example was, because your thing was talking about underutilization of great people and the actually the minimum standard. Like there's such a double standard. I just talked about sort of the double standard of pay and how much CEOs get when the inputs are almost the same, not quite. But you're also hitting on what is really coming up in the overemployment issue. So the overemployment, that tech CEO would disagree with you because like, no, 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 Tracy, that would be different if you're meeting your deliverables, that's one thing, right? And you have spare time on your hands. What he's saying happened, and I'm not even going to argue with what he said occurred. Let's just take it as truth. He's saying that these employees lied about having two jobs. I'm guessing there must be some employment policy because otherwise it's not illegal to have two jobs, like under the law. But maybe they violated some company policy. And also, they didn't meet their end of the bargain. The employment contract says the company pays them, and in return, the employee does the work. And so, according to the CEO's post, the employees didn't show up for meetings. They were constantly late. They didn't actually do work that they were supposed to do. And it was noticed by their colleagues and their managers because the work that was supposed to get done wasn't getting done. So it's not the same as your case, Tracy, where you were absolutely getting your work done in a much shorter amount of time that was necessary. These people were taking the time, but not getting the work done. And I do want to say for the record that I don't think that's okay. Like that's a performance issue, right? Like you agreed to take a job and you were going to complete your work and meet their expectations. And if you don't do that, that's wrong, especially if you're intentionally not doing it. This is not a matter of competence, let's assume. It's a matter of intentionally not even trying to get the work done and just get as much money as possible. So no, I don't think that's okay. And I'm not arguing with that. What I do have an issue with, though, is how the company has portrayed this whole thing. And that gets to also what you were starting to allude to, Tracy, which is the power imbalance. And I have many points about this, but let's just start with looking at how the CEO has kind of taken a I'm such a victim of this situation. So this victim mentality of, oh, we're so hard done by. Look what these evil people have done to us, this innocent company, and me, the innocent, hard done by CEO, without recognizing that actually you have the power, like you did something about it. You're not helpless in this situation. You're not so hard done by because, as the CEO said, they figured it out. They have all the monitoring and controls in place to make sure that employees are doing their work. And as soon as they decided employees were not doing their work, they fired their asses, right? They kicked them out of the company. All the power is resting with the company. Think about a more actual victim side of all the people who have ever had some kind of harassment or even just mild microaggressions or things that have happened against them where because they're employees, they don't have the power. They can't fire the company. They can't fire the CEO. They have to grin and bear it because they have to get the money. And I think part of the CEO's argument of why nobody should feel sorry for employees is these were not minimum wage employees that needed this two jobs to survive. These were well-paid computer engineers or something making like $140,000 a year US. And so what they were doing was just out and out stealing. And so this, I've called a false narrative because the narrative is written by the victor. And in this case, the victor is the one in power, which is the company, is exaggerating an impact where to a degree that's painting such a one-sided picture, not necessarily against these two employees that, yeah, let's just say they did something wrong, but then making it as if the whole system was rigged towards the employees. And I get so angry at the irony or the hypocrisy of when somebody or a few people call out racism or discrimination by a company, then the company's like, oh, that's just a few bad apples. We're not racist. There's no systemic racism here. But as soon as now this is happening, suddenly it's this big global social trend of overemployment. It's not two bad apple employees. It's a massive trend that these evil people are taking advantage of these poor companies who are just run by people. You know, it's not just, these are run by people. That's one of his excuses. So it's the hypocrisy of it really bothers me. And this false idea of we're such victims when it's like they have no idea of their own privilege in this case.
Yeah. Well, and I there's 100% the story of controlling the narrative, right? And
Mm.
quite honestly, from a corporate perspective, a lot of effort goes into that, right? Like I've been part of organizations where employees were let go for cause, sued the organization, right? And then you're like, oh God, like I was the one who was there, like I was present for this, I was documenting it, right? And you're like, I think I remember. It's not
Yes.
like recorded anyway. So
Yes.
all and again, all of these people are just people. But then your companies will defend themselves, just like a human will defend themselves if they're being attacked by a bear, right? One of my really good friends, Lindsay Harl-Kadat, she has a podcast called "Businesses Are People Too," and the
Mm.
whole point is that businesses are run by people, and
Mhm.
therefore they are run like people, right? We start to try and to protect
Mm.
ourselves.
Mhm.
And when you have the power, when you have the money, when you have the ears, right, as people do higher up in an organization or with the marketing budgets that an organization has,
Mhm.
you control the narrative, right?
Mhm.
It's just a fact. It's the same thing with the news. We're not going to talk about that today because that'll go in a
Okay.
completely different direction. And we'll be here for 16 hours. But whoever has the money controls the narrative,
Yeah.
right? The companies have the money to control the narrative. And one of the reasons why I love conversations like this is it helps us to understand what is our perspective, right? This is what the company is saying.
Yeah.
This is some of the things I've experienced in my past. This is what I've heard. But one of the things that really sat poorly with me in the articles that you shared with me, Rosie, is that like, did anybody ask the employees, right? I don't know. Maybe that guy has it. Let's talk about the US. And if you
Mhm.
have any kind of medical issues you
Oh
need to
yeah.
deal with, right? Like the cost of that is substantial. I've known people who don't go to the hospital when their finger is sliced open because they can't afford to do that, right? And so what if, yes, this is
Mhm.
a high, well paid position, right? But what
Mhm.
if someone has a kid with leukemia that needs constant treatment or has a family overseas that they're trying to rescue and bring to this country, right? Like, did we ask? Were we curious? Because I feel
Mm.
like in the current corporate hierarchy, it's almost like the higher you move up, the more permission we give to be single minded and not
Mhm.
curious about people
Mhm.
anymore, which I think is the exact opposite of really what should happen. Because if you're leading people, shouldn't one of your number one interests be being curious about your people?
Mm. Okay. Yes. Yes, I think it should be about asking questions and being curious. And I feel like there should also just be a basic caring for other people. Like businesses are people, and guess what makes up businesses? People. Like their companies are made up of people. Companies, even though legally, if it's incorporated, it's a person, which is a whole other thing because I don't agree with that. But at the end of there is no company if there are not the people working for the company.
Right.
But and I think you're kind of getting to this too. What is coming up for me is the sense of entitlement and the overvaluation of money as an obligation, or how it creates an obligation that gives more power and more entitlement to the employer side of a mutual contract than it gives to the employee. And this is companies are going to hate hearing this, but I'm going to say it because it's not just me. It's based on lots of research. So I have finished reading this book called Accounting for Slavery, and yes, it is as exciting as it sounds. All right, I'm an accountant, but this is actually really prevalent to all of us working today because the same, very very similar, if not the same, mindsets on how slave owners thought about slaves as labor is still here today, and how we consider the what we're entitled to, we meaning companies think we're entitled to from the labor of our employees. And I heard, like, of course it is different because of physically how people are treated and financially. They're not I guess by a dictionary definition, they're not slaves because they're being paid. But the sense of entitlement and the way that comes through in the CEO's description in his post is actually very, very scary. right? It's as if I actually wonder if he's more offended by the fact that their employees were not really doing the work, or that they were getting paid a lot of money and still not doing the work. Because I'm offended by the fact that executives get paid hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars for what exactly? Like, could my coffee at Starbucks be cheaper if they were not paying their senior people or whoever that much money? And is it even really necessary? Would that be stealing from me as the end customer because I don't want to pay $5 for a coffee? If I could pay $4 for a coffee and have the CEO get paid $1 million less, I'm okay with that. So the fact that he keeps using these terms that vilify and criminalize these employees is problematic, because I think going down that road, that's also how policing has police has come to be. It's when slave owners were feeling like, no, I'm entitled. Who is that slave to run away from me? I own that person. And I think there's still a mentality today of how companies feel like they own. Even though they physically do not or legally do not own employees, they kind of saying that they do because they're so angry when employees take time off for sick leave, right? It's like, oh, but I own their work. I own their time. No, actually, you don't own me and you don't own my time. You just think that you do because you happen to be paying me a salary. It's no longer a contractual relationship. It's not a relationship at all. They're treating me like property, just like slave owners treated slaves like property.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, I never thought I'd want to read an accounting book, but I might have to look. Like,
you wanted a controversial conversation, Tracy? Here you go.
This is my favorite though, because this is the thing. What if? I love a good what if, right? So what if these employees were not working a second job,
right?
And they weren't delivering on their contract agreements, right?
Yeah.
What if that was true? Yeah. Then they'd just be any other employee that wasn't meeting their contract terms. They would get fired for cause because you said you were going to do this and you're not, but it wouldn't be a story. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't be a thing. So again, like, what are you really saying from the narrator's perspective about your values, right? Are you here to just start something so you can be the one who coined overemployment? Well, like, what are you actually here to do? Because if that was like, I work with people who didn't do their job, right? Yeah. And they got let go, and they got let go quietly, and it just kind of, I mean, sometimes it turned into a legal thing, which I have been a part of, and I did not enjoy that. But it's not really a thing. So, but if it's because you had another job, and we also don't know, like, I don't know if these employees just like weren't good at their either jobs. So they were trying to they're like, at some point someone's going to realize I'm not good at my job. So I'll just have two jobs so that when I lose one, I'm safe. Right. And if someone else is going to hire somebody, and this is the thing that's interesting to me. Now, I've never had like conflicting work happening at the same time, but I've had more than one job at a time, right? Like, I teach cardio dance, and I do this, and I run a community, right? And there's like different revenue streams, right? And if I was going to be hired by somebody, I would say, like, I do this, right? This is something that I do. I have no intention of not doing it because I work for you for X amount of hours a day. I've actually told people who wanted to try and hire me that if you just want me to be butts in seats for 8 hours a day, I'm not interested in that. If you want to give me a job description and you're confident enough in me to execute on that, I'm like, you either trust me or you don't trust me, right? And that's fine. But I know that I will get that done because that's the type of person that I am. And it won't take me 8 hours. So I'm not just going to waste my time. I got a 4-year-old at home, right? So I think I think that's the most annoying part to me, is that if the reason they weren't doing their job was because of something other than they had another job on the side, we wouldn't even be having this conversation today.
And you're right. Like, we don't know the back history of the employees. I think there's enough, even if there wasn't anything, like, even if we assumed, these employees just have pure lazy or malicious intent, there's still problems there because, again, hypocrisy. That's why I'm like, if there's a great resignation, this to me is the great hypocrisy of what's going on too. And
Arshad's adding another different piece, right? Like, what if the second job didn't even pay them money? Do we know that? I don't know that, right?
It's a good question. I mean, I honestly wonder, is the CEO more offended by the fact that this person wasn't showing up at meetings and turning on their Zoom camera? Or were they offended that they were actually getting a good deal? Because this is the other thing I know, like everybody's all about getting the good deal, right? Like how much you might be okay spending $1,000 on, I don't know, an iPhone, right? But if somebody else got that iPhone for $900, you'd be furious. You'd be like, how could I like they stole from me that I paid $100 more, even though you're perfectly okay with paying the $1,000 initially, right? And that's kind of what I see happening here too with the one of the psychology around loss and financial literacy is actually that we feel losses a lot more than we feel gains, right? And employers, I should say, have no problem stealing time from employees when they put in the contract, here's your minimum, we expect 40 hours a week or whatever from you, and you have to meet that no matter what. But on the flip side, there's no cap on how many hours more we're going to get you to work, because pretty much everybody's job descriptions, I'm sure all of you attending today has it in yours. It says may have overtime required, may require weekend work or blah, 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 evening work, blah, blah, blah. And unless you are unionized or in a certain types of jobs or certain levels, low enough levels of jobs, there is no labor law protecting you from how many hours the company demands. And even if there was, again, the reality is the company has the power. So if you don't do however much they ask you to do, you could lose your job. And if you don't have the financial freedom to risk that, then you're stuck. You're going to work 60 hours, 80 hours, whatever it is that they say. So it's so hypocritical to me that they can demand as many hours as they want from you. And not only is it's not even extra. Like you probably heard this too if you've been working for any amount of time. To get promoted, it's not enough to do the bare minimum. 40 hours a week, even though that's the contract, that's only the bare minimum. You've got to go above and beyond and demonstrate your commitment and dedication, which usually means 60, 80 hours a week, in order to even be considered for these higher positions that would get you double the salary that these fired people got, right? So again, I'm not saying what they did was okay if they were genuinely shirking and not doing their job, which does affect everybody, including their colleagues. But I think we as a society and this company, our economy has to recognize our role, our collective responsibility for the system that we've created through capitalism and through whiteness and white supremacy culture, where only certain people get those jobs that no matter how many hours are in the week, they are getting paid 2, 3, 4, 10 times as much as other people who could put in the same amount of hours, but just won't get promoted, won't get access to those positions. And the slightest thing that goes wrong, they're the first to be fired.
Absolutely. And this is making me think of another experience I had early on in my career when we had kind of like six or seven young people in the department, right? So the company I work for, I really appreciated it. Actually, they gave young, like just out of university grads opportunities to do really cool stuff. And pay us hardly anything for it, but it was really good experience. And we all got to be really good friends. So one of the other people in the department, working in like kind of a different area, my manager came to me and said, "Oh, did you know that so-and-so is coming in on the weekend?" And the first thing I thought was, "Oh my gosh, does he need help? Because like, I'm not busy." Like, I could help him so he doesn't have to come in on the weekend. This is the thing that I'm thinking, right? Knowing that
you'll pay 2 hours less of Minesweeper so you can help this guy out.
Right. And be like a good peep, right? But where he was going with that was that was making an impression with the senior leadership. So I should take a note of that and come in on the weekend too. And I was like, one, I'm just annoyed that you would even ask me that. Yeah. When you know that I have no work to do, right? Like I was constantly coming to him being like, "Hey, can I help with this?" Like you said, like I was always looking for work, and I got some really cool projects, not even in my department because it was looking for work. Right. And so you know that, well, I have been trying to communicate it to you. So whether or not you know it is a different thing, because I don't know if you've been listening, maybe not based on this information, this conversation we're having. But I was like my assumption was that he was going to ask me to help my coworker so that he wouldn't have to come in on the weekend. Seriously? This is what makes a good impression, that you have to come in on the weekend because you can't get your job done in 40 hours a week. That's what's good, right? I was so confused.
Mhm.
And we treat it like that. And I got caught up in that in my corporate career as well, right? Like
Mhm.
you work the extra hours and then that's
Yeah.
what is expected of you. And this was my experience then coming back to work after maternity leave,
Yeah.
being like, well, I'm not sure any of those hours were ever really required before. Like, if I look at this and see if I can be more strategic with my in office time, I don't think that's necessary. To the point where I had it written in my contract that I worked from 9 until 4 because that's what I thought was required and I would use my time wisely. But the whole fact that like this is the pattern, right? Like, and then the more you work, and then you move up, and then you have to work more until the point where
Yes.
people are working. Like my sister is a lawyer, and there was a point where she was working like 20-hour days on a continual basis, which is not good for how a human functions.
Yes.
and and that was desirable, right? That's what people
Yes.
wanted to do because that's what it looked like to be successful.
Hmm.
And again, now we're kind of taking this conversation in a different direction, but I think that's another narrative that really needs to be conversed about.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I think we all know it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
Because we only have 24 hours in a day. And it's
Yeah.
not like CEOs don't have kids and families and stuff too, right? I think there's just like kind of a humanity that's missing in all of this.
Yeah. Yes, and I am gonna disagree with you a little bit there, but it's not really disagreeing with I think the core of what you're saying.
I
I
love a
don't
good
think you-
disagreement. This is what the show is for. This is how we learn, people.
It is, and this is also where like okay, what are we really saying? Because I don't think people actually want to put in those hours, right?
Yeah.
But we've been so conditioned to thinking that that's what's normal and required that we're like, well, if we want promotion or we want success, then we have to want to work those hours.
Right.
But we're all, especially now, like post COVID and I don't know, the Great Awakening, maybe instead of the Great Resignation. We're like, actually, no, I never wanted to work that way. And what if we didn't? And so now we're seeing this like this kind of tug of war of, but I don't want to. And maybe now I have a little bit more power that I never had before as an employee to not do it just because you said that that's the way. Here's another scary example from slavery that is still very much alive today, where there's no reward for overwork, right? We've normalized it, and there's punishment for underwork. If you don't do your 40 hours, you get punished. But if you do more than your 40 hours, as much as companies like to say, oh no, but we reward you, it's like, no, any reward is so minimal that it's not even worth it to the employee, right? It's not worth it to the employee at the end of the day. So just like, does this sound familiar? The people who do a really good job and they show they can do a lot, all their reward is just more work, right? and more harder work and more overtime.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they did in slavery times, where they would be very data driven. They were data and evidence and metrics driven individuals. They were very smart in the way they ran their businesses. And they would calculate and measure how much, let's say, cotton each slave picked every day. And they would align performance essentially with whichever slave picked the most cotton, and that became the new standard. So of course the standard just kept going up. And if you were the slave that picked the most cotton, and you maybe got rewarded that day with a little bit of extra food or something, then it would just backfire against you because the next day your quota went up. And like, oh, you picked whatever, 80 pounds of cotton today. Next day we expect you to pick 85. So there was, again, literally no reward. It's this balance between, okay, I need to do enough to like keep my job. I'm talking about today. I need to keep my job and to maybe get promoted, but it's killing me. And so I'm also going to, what would probably be called by the CEO stealing, which is actually just trying to survive in a dignified way with keeping my mental health intact by not doing too much, because all that will happen is they're going to put more work on me and expect me to work more hours.
Mm-hmm.
How's that good?
Yeah, it's just one of those things that the mass population has done it that way for so long that now it's scary, right? It's scary to be the person who's going to be like, you know what? This is dumb. And I'm not going to work in the evening because I have kids and family time is like the number one priority for me. And again, I think for me, it always comes back to like, do we actually care? Right? Because
Mhm.
could we have a conversation with that employee or a group of employees to understand better why they want to draw those lines?
Mhm.
And if someone does want to draw those lines, this is the other thing I think is dumb about like the corporate hierarchy, right? Is I get really good at my job and then I move up to managing people and I might not care about managing people. I would
Yeah.
just liked my job, right? And people like my husband who have analytical brains and want to just do analysis get capped out at their career when they're 35 because they don't want to be managers. And I'm like, well, the things this guy can do with an Excel spreadsheet is obscene. Like, I can't do that. So shouldn't
Yep.
we pay him to do that? Like, I think we should. But it's about being brave enough to break the narrative and say, like, you know what? And I think this is where a lot of people have gotten to during the pandemic as well, is just, I'm just not going to do that. Like, you hit my boundary, right? And
Yes.
if you hit my boundary enough times, I just can't do it. Like, I got to the point where I knew it was a bad decision to go to work every day in my
Yes.
work environment. And I was just like, how many days am I going to make the decision to go to work when I know it's a bad decision? Right?
Yes.
At some point, I'm insane
Yes.
because I'm making a decision I know is bad.
Yes.
Right? There's a point where I don't know that decision is bad, right? And if I
Yes.
don't know the decision is bad, I use my best judgment at the time. But once
Yes.
I know,
Yes.
yeah, can we do that? Like,
Yes.
I can't. We get to the point where we're just like, I can't. And this is where we're getting.
And you know what kills me about what you just said, Tracy, is that you paid the cost, right? Like there have been so many, mostly women actually, I have met who were so burnt out and in such a toxic place that they felt like I can't do this anymore. I have to quit. And some of the people I've coached before they made the decision they want to quit, but they haven't actually quit. I'm working with them just trying to find, is there another way? Like, frankly, I don't want them to have to go with zero income to regain their mental health. I'm like, this is actually, it's literally mental health. It is health because mental health is health.
Mhm.
So this is sick time. This is disability. This is anything you can do. And I don't consider this stealing from the company because they put in their time with the company. The company has created this, right?
Mhm.
Anything you can do where you can get some support, and that includes financial support. So you don't have to go without any income at all just to feel better, just to not be abused every
Mhm.
day and hate yourself and think life is miserable. And I've been through that too. I've been in those toxic work situations and the same things of, is this all? I would almost, like when I was in my most depressed state, because I have depression. It's like, I don't quite want to kill myself, but I would rather be dead. Like, I don't feel the need to live anymore if this is what living looks like, right? Like, this
Right.
is serious. These are serious epidemics of
Yeah.
illness and mental illness going on. So if you are not feeling good about work, and there could be many, many reasons, it's not wrong to want to walk away. But I also hope employees feel less of the stigma, because that's also where these high performers get to, is like, I'm not going to say I'm mentally ill or try to claim disability because that will just brand me as
Right.
someone who couldn't cut it. And I'm a high performer, so I can cut it. Or I'll never recover performance wise because they'll just see me as this crazy person. And I've heard this from many, many, especially professional women, right, who are so burnt out. And it's, to me, if you've decided that you're ready to leave, there's nothing to lose anyway, right? It's just you're
Yeah.
buying some time to heal and have some financial support while you're healing so that you don't have to do it alone. And so you're not also then the additional stress of trying to find new income or a new job to do with that. That will be better.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, and this was my scenario. It's actually funny because when I quit my job, my boss offered me a sabbatical because I was just like, I'm like, I can't find my place here, right?
Yeah.
Like, these are the things that's important to me. This is what's being asked of me. I cannot find an alignment. I've been trying and I can't. And I thought it was really awesome of them to offer me a sabbatical to just like explore and then come back with my job intact, right? But for me, I was like, I can't be connected to this, right?
Mhm.
Like, because I just felt like it was pulling me backwards,
Mhm.
and I needed to go forwards. But
Was it a
another
paid
topic of
sabbatical? I'm just
conversation.
curious. Was that a paid sabbatical? That
No, it was
Yeah.
not a paid sabbatical.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting to me because I think that happens a lot too, where people are like, oh, now you're threatening to leave, so now I'll pay attention. Right? But you
Yes.
had an opportunity to pay attention this whole time. And
Yes.
especially if you're like, my experience was like, I'm the management team, right? Like I put so much effort every day into paying attention to what's going on with my employees.
Yeah.
So I can create space for them when I know that this gentleman is waiting to find out that his wife, whether or not his wife has cancer. I was like, why are you even here? Right? Like, just go home, right? Like,
Yeah.
what you're doing today is not as important as that. It's a one day in a corporate work environment, right? We're not going out of business because you took the afternoon off, right?
Yeah.
Take the afternoon off.
Yeah.
And for someone like me who was so focused on that, and to know that I tried so hard to communicate what was important to me to the degree that I wrote it in my contract, and you're still not paying attention to that, like I'm at a loss, right? Like I don't know what else to do. I feel like I've done everything that I can. And I think that's a great, quite honestly, that would have been a great recommendation for me because that was totally, it was a mental health issue.
Yes.
And I needed to have space to deal with it. And my solution, not the only solution, peeps. That's why we have these conversations. And if you are feeling like you're in that arena, or I would even say if you're an organization and you've had a lot of people leaving your organization because of those types of things, you need to be in the conversation with Rosie. Please, yesterday. If we could go back in time, we can't do that. So today, not tomorrow, today.
There's alternatives. Like this is I was an HR director. I know they're not there to help you. And I'm not the only one saying that. I just talked to a good friend of mine who's in HR. She quit her job from a charity, a children's charity, because of all these overwork problems, right? And she works in HR. And she's like, most HR people are actually not nice. So I didn't even go that far. I'm just like, they're not there to advocate for you as the employee. They're there to protect the company. So yes, they'll never be the ones to tell you, well, why don't you take a paid leave? They might say to Tracy, take an unpaid leave because at least I don't have to pay you, right? But they're not there to help come up with solutions that are going to work for you. So there are alternatives. You're just not going to hear it from your own company. So do get external advice or talk to family and friends and people who have your best interest in mind.
Absolutely. And perhaps through more conversations like this, we will be able to move towards companies having their employees' best interests in mind, which is the goal of these things. And one of the things I just want to wrap up with today is a lot of us. So like I was at a managerial level, right? Like I'm a millennial, right? So we're the younger generations are moving into decision-making ability, right? And we have a different perspective of this is what corporate has been for 80 years, right? The thing that's interesting for me, because my background is marketing, is that pretty much everything that was happening in advertising in the 60s is still happening today. And it wasn't good in the 60s for the humans, and it's not good for the humans today either. Now we have the ability to look at this more strategically and say, these are people running this business, right? If we had batteries running the business, we'd want to make sure that we were charging the batteries, right? Or replacing the batteries, but that's what we're doing right now. We're just sucking the life out of people and then replacing them with other people to suck the life out of them. Doesn't work. Might work with batteries, doesn't work with people. So if I wanted to create an environment where I can recharge my humans, which it's a tricky thing because every human recharges in a different way, right? You got to pay attention. You got to give people personal space and all of these things. But if we start to ask those questions, that's the path to doing something different. And when we get stuck in this rhetoric of that's the way it's always been done, even though we know that it sucked the whole time, right? You guys heard it today, right? Like I'm sure there's more things that are similar to slavery than we even know. And that's why, again, these conversations can be so insightful. But I'm pretty sure most of us are thinking we don't want to do it that way, right? But we get caught up, and then like you put in all of your effort. Like I put in those 100-hour weeks. That everybody else should have to put in those 100-hour weeks. Well, it was stupid when I put in, right? Like, and I never got to a 100-hour week, which I'm really glad about. But like I put in 80-hour weeks. I don't want my son to have to put in 80-hour weeks. I want him to be able to have a life and have relationships with humans outside of the office and feel rewarded by his work. And I don't believe that those things have to be mutually exclusive. So if we're asking the right questions and we give ourselves permission to let go of what we have been, even if we ourselves were upholding those procedures and systems, we don't have to, right? And when we ask the questions, it gives us an opportunity to explore what could be different.
Yep. And last thing I'll say to your point about rest is if you look at Olympic athletes or high performance athletes, right? They work as hard as anybody else. So let's just say an equivalent of a 40-hour week for an athlete, a marathon runner, maybe 4 or 5 hours is what the time they spend actually marathon running. Like that's the performance. Everything else is all driven towards performance, but it includes sleeping, muscle recovery, the right nutrition, the right coaching, right? Like mental fitness, social life, like all of it together so that they can run the marathon and get a gold medal. Companies and businesses and not-for-profits are the only ones who expect that marathon running should happen for the whole 40 hours and then you're going to win a gold medal. Like that doesn't work for human beings, which is what we are, right? But yeah, there's a huge disconnect.
Well, and like when you shared that example, the number one thing I thought of was like my favorite, Andre DeGrasse, Canadian sprinter. And like that guy runs for what, 20 seconds in a race?
Right.
Faster than that probably because he's ridiculously fast. But like that's his effort, right? Yeah. And his effort beats pretty much everybody in the world.
Yes.
Right? And all of that effort only is available if you have rest, if you have all of these other things. And you see that even in Olympics, because him as an athlete, right, he does the 100 meter, he does the 200 meter, he does the relay, right? So he runs in a lot of races. And if you don't rest, you can't run.
That's a great example because he runs for 20 seconds, or actually we hope he runs for less than 20 seconds, right? Why don't you only run for 10 seconds and win the gold medal? And he gets, I don't know, let's say he gets $1 million sponsorship from Gatorade or something. Is he overpaid? Is he stealing from Gatorade because he's only running for 10 seconds, but he gets $1 million? No, there's a much more holistic, bigger picture we need to look at, right? So yeah, I could go on and on, but I probably should let you wrap up if you want to wrap up.
And I think this is really one of the big overarching points is there's more to the story. And if we just take all of these stories for what they are, and we don't use our brains and our hearts to ask questions about, is this the whole story? Maybe there's something missing. Is there something I think is important that's not included here? Then we're just becoming cogs in the machine of the narratives that people are dictating for us. And
100%.
I'm, for one, I'm done with it. I know Rosie's done with it. And the folks who are here joining us today are probably done with it to some degree as well. Mm-hmm. Cogs in the machine, that's for machines. We have robots for that now, right? We don't need the humans for that. Let's use humans to their human potential. And there's a long way for us to go to make that happen. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining in the conversation today. One of the things that I believe is hugely important with any conversation is to continue to participate in the conversation. So it's cool to come have what is 1 hour conversation on a whole bunch of different things that started out being overemployment, but it's the way we get the opportunity to try on these thoughts and really understand what our beliefs are and to make change in an area that we are passionate about is by staying in the conversation. And so, Rosie, for those of our peeps who want to stay in the conversation, where can they find you and where are some other great places for them to go?
Thanks for asking that, Tracy. I definitely do want to keep the conversation going. So please connect with me. Best place is right here on LinkedIn. And I'll drop you can find me, I think, easily just through this LinkedIn Live.
She's tagged on this post, so
Exactly.
just click it.
I will also drop my links in the comments because I'm also pretty active on Instagram. And of course, there's my website. So you can understand more about my background and where I'm coming from for this philosophy of anti-racism, anti-extractive capitalism, and so on through my website, which is changinglenses.ca.
Oh, it makes me think about taking my contacts out of my eyes. There's much more to it than that, peeps. So definitely stay in contact with Rosie. There's the links, but probably the fastest just like click on the link in LinkedIn. Or if you know me and you don't know Rosie and you want an intro, just message me and I will do an intro. Happy to do that because I want, at the end of the day, I feel like my son gets to grow up in a more accepting world because we're having these conversations. So that's why this is so important to me. Thank you all for joining us today. Rosie, thank you so much for choosing this topic because this was really, really fun, for educating us and for sharing a space for us to be able to try on our thoughts and our perspectives. And until next time, everybody, permission to do you.